Welcome to our final in-service of the school year today. We have some pretty neat up that can kind of hopefully give us a day of reflection and some things to think about for the start of the next school year. So we'll be traveling today as a middle school group. There are a couple of, we have a sign-in sheet at each session. So once I leave the podium, I'll head up and we'll start to just send the sign-in sheet through and we can sign in during the presentation, and then whoever ends up with it, if you can make sure it gets back to me at the end of the session, and anybody that for some reason it doesn't find their way to, just find me at the end of the session or at the beginning of the next one, and we'll take care of your sign-in. So for our first session, the topic, which is certainly an important one for us at the middle level, is mental health. And we are excited to have Dr. William Davies with us, who is the Community Outreach Specialist for the Department of Behavioral Health at the Allegheny Health Network, where he facilitates professional development, assists with program operations, and develops behavioral health programs to address community behavioral health needs. Prior to this role, Dr. Davies served for 13 years in a variety of positions at Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic. These roles included Director of Clinical Care Services for the Child and Adolescent Outpatient Service Line, the Director of the Adolescent Partial Hospitalization Programs, and the WPIC Inpatient School Principal. Dr. Davies has a doctorate in educational leadership, master's in teaching, and bachelor's in developmental psychology. He is passionate about saving the lives of children and adolescents through the lens of skill-based learning that transforms the school culture. Dr. Davies' favorite things to do are hang out, play, dance, sing, read, and crack jokes with his 7-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son. His favorite corny dad joke is, what part of a tree does a dog like the most? Dr. Davies. I missed that. I have Dr. Uffberg on here as well. So I have Dr. Heather Uffberg as well, who was raised in New York and has been a Pittsburgh resident since 2007, where she lives with her husband and 4 children. She earned a master's degree in school psychology at Columbia University, followed by a doctoral degree in school clinical child psychology at Yeshiva University. Dr. Uffberg worked at the Children's Institute for over 11 years, where she held many roles, including direct patient care, management, and supervision. She recently started at AHN's Jefferson Hills Child and Adolescent Clinic. She's passionate about working with children, adolescents, young adults, and their families on a broad range of issues such as coping with anxiety, mood difficulties, behavioral concerns, complex medical conditions, and chronic pain disorders, none of which any of our kids do. Yeah, right. So, welcome Dr. Uffberg and Dr. Davies.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's great to be here with you. And this is the middle school group, right?
Correct.
So, you guys are awesome, and I thank you guys for being here today. I'm sure yesterday was really fun for you guys. I'm sure that there was a lot of quiet minds in the school yesterday. So before we get started, I'm going to take us back about 53 years in this building. So we're talking 1966, not living in high school. That's the year cover. So there's the senior prom in 1966. There's some students studying. There's a football game. They didn't do that thing where they all like dress up in those goofy outfits and where they all match and do stuff. They didn't do that back then, but pretty similar. But the person I want to focus on today, and there's their senior day back in 1966, and it looks like they're kind of, I don't know, doing something to that car there. There's a big 66 on the car, and interestingly, they all had this thing with beanies back then, so you can see them wearing it on their heads. But I want to talk today about a guy named Joe Macetta. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. I believe he was the high school principal here for about 10 years. And then before that, he was a chemistry teacher in this school. And he was really inspirational to a lot of students here. In fact, there was a couple of students who needed his inspiration. And one day in class, he was talking to them about his background. And he was an Air Force pilot in the Korean War. And he was in addition to being a full-time chemistry teacher, he was in the Air National Guard. And so he would talk and tell stories to his students about that, and there was a couple of boys in there who were particularly interested in that. And he really made a connection with them. Even to the point where he was doing study sessions after school that were taking place in his house. I know times are different. But he was doing study sessions in his house. He was meeting kids out in the community, in the library, and helping them. Even when kids were graduating from college, they would come back and get his assistance in chemistry. And he would serve them and help them out. And these two students who he was helping, who graduated in 1966, they made him a model of his airplane that he flew in the Korean War. And in the Korean War, his nickname, they would write the names of the squadron or whatever the guy's name was on the airplane on the side. So his name was Papa Joe. And so they made a model of that airplane with two airplanes behind it for him for graduation as a gift. And it was Papa Joe and the boys. And it was something that stuck with him even to this day. And I'm just going to read to you a text from that student who I was talking to last night, who said, he was inspirational and I'll never forget him. This is coming from a 72-year-old right now. My interactions with him seem like they were yesterday. We're going to fast forward a little bit. Oh, by the way, that student was my dad. We're going to fast forward a little bit to yesterday, which was the last day of school for this district, and I had the pleasure of being outside of Markham Elementary School for the last day. And I saw the fifth graders come out as they're transitioning to come see you guys. And they were standing there taking pictures, and I noticed 3 or 4 of them were crying. And I noticed some of the third graders were crying, and the first graders were crying, and I'm like, I've never seen this before. Because I remember when I was in 5th grade, I was crying because I was so happy to get out. And I'm like, I'm ready to go hang out, I'm ready to goof off, I'm ready to go sleep in, hang out with my friends. But there was something else going on yesterday, and these kids, I could tell there was reluctancy to actually want to leave yesterday. So something really special is happening in this district, and it goes way back. It goes way back, and we don't see this everywhere. This goes way back, decades back. There's something that you guys are doing that is deeply connecting to these students, and that's what we're here to talk about today. How can we make a deeper connection with these students, particularly students with behavioral health concerns? And how can we give them that kind of a similar experience? So 53 years from now, there's a student talking about you guys. There's a 72-year-old student, ex-student, who's talking about you guys in the same way my dad talked about Joe Macetta. So the first thing we're going to do, and we try to be very interactive. So we might do the whole Ricky Lake thing and come up there and talk to you and stuff like that. I promise I'm not like Wendy Williams, I'm more like Ricky Lake. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through an exercise. And I know you guys have done some great work with mindfulness already. But we're going to do an exercise that intentionally focuses on things that you appreciate. And this is an exercise that you can do before your students come into class. Maybe in the morning when you get there. Maybe after lunch, right before they come back in, before you get them from the cafeteria, however your routine looks. And so Dr. Upberg is passing out an acorn to everybody. What I want you to think about is something that happened this morning that you're grateful for. And I noticed people coming in. I was standing out there outside the window, and I noticed people out, some folks were kind of running in, and, it's hard. Yesterday was the last day of school, and, trying to come in on time and be here and be engaged, and you're thinking about your summer, vacation or whatever you're going to be doing here coming up. But let's just try to think about something that happened to you or you experienced this morning that you're grateful for. It could be something very small, but it's actually not very small. Maybe your kids did something really cute this morning. My daughter, when she woke up, she was, my daughter goes to Markham, and so when she woke up this morning, she goes, "Wait a minute, you have to go to work?" I'm like, "Yeah, just because you have off school doesn't mean the rest of the world has off." So I'm grateful for that interaction because I thought that was pretty cute. So take about 1 or 2 minutes and think about something that you're really grateful for. Maybe there was less school buses on the road so you could get here faster. I was going to say maybe the sun was out, but that's not the case today. So just take a minute and think about that. And write it down on that acorn. Okay, think about it for about 30 more seconds. All right, now so it's Ricky Lake, Wendy Williams time. And would anybody like to share something that happened to them today already that they're grateful for?
I just woke up and had more time this morning. Unloaded the dishwasher, started loading laundry.
Nice. Okay, you had more time, you were able to do some things in the house. Wonderful. Yes?
I'm just going to be like George Burns. I was just grateful to wake up.
I was actually waiting for somebody to say that. That's good. Grateful to be here, grateful to wake up this morning. Yes?
My 4-year-old didn't fuss when I left the house.
Ah, nice. How'd that make you feel this morning? Did you feel it in your body a little bit?
Yeah.
A little less
No,
stress?
no stress.
That's
She
good.
just said, "I love you, Mama." I love you.
Fabulous. Anyone else would like to share what they're grateful for? Something that happened this morning. Yes?
My anxiety was way less today than it was getting up yesterday.
I wonder why. Dr. Upberg, would you like to share something?
Sure.
Well, what you said, I don't know your name, but in the pink there, reminded me of how I have that same experience, like I've got the 4 kids, so someone is always fussy. It's so rare to have a day that no one is fussing. And I did have one of those this morning, and I was particularly grateful for my babysitter who came early so I could be here on time, and just how reliable she is and how she makes my life doable. So my babysitter and no fussing, double whammy.
So when you come in, it's the middle of the winter time. It's January. You're kind of like halfway through the school year. It's dark out. You're feeling it, right? These are the kind of things that you can do. One of the things you can intentionally shift your mindset to more positive thoughts. And this actually has a huge impact upon you collectively over time. And so what we're going to do is Dr. Elfberg's going to take you through the guided imagery related to this that you can practice every day before the kids get there.
Okay, before you ring the bell, I have a mini intro. So we are going to experience some meditation. Meditation's rearing its head pretty frequently in popular culture, so I'm sure most of you have had some, experience with this, but we're going to go for it anyway. And one of the things that I like to really emphasize with meditation is that not only does it give you a moment's peace, but it sort of exercises this meditation muscle or this mindfulness muscle in our brain. And the reason why that's so important is that mindfulness is really all about being in the moment. Most of the things that make us uncomfortable or anxious or worried or depressed or filled with dread have to do with things in the past or things in the future. Very rarely is the present moment really a problem. Sometimes it is, and we have to deal with it, but very rarely is the present moment where the problem is. And so practicing mindfulness, which we're going to do, is a way of training the brain to be in the moment. And when we're in the moment, and when the kids are in the moment, we can get a lot more done. We're less distracted, we're more present. And it's a really good feeling. So we're going to practice the meditation, and then we'll talk briefly about how you could apply that in the classroom. Make it part of your day. So we're about to ring a bell, and that will signal to you that we're going to get into this meditation. So listen up. Allow yourself to come to a comfortable sitting position. You will get Act 48 credits for doing this. Don't worry. Feel your feet firmly planted on the floor. And just pay attention to your posture. Don't try to change it or make it different. Just notice. Notice the rhythm of your breath as you breathe in and out. Put your hand on your lower abdomen. Just notice. Breathe in, and your chest and stomach rises. Breathe out, and your chest and stomach goes down. As you breathe in and out, you start to notice the slowing down of your heart rate, allowing you to fully be in this present moment. Continue to breathe in and out, knowing that this is the most important thing right now. Just being here, just sitting, breathing. If you're comfortable, you could allow your eyes to gently shut. Now we're going to purposefully relax your muscles, starting from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. Let us notice the tops of our heads first as we move down through the body. As we do that, we will relax our muscles, all while focusing on our breathing and just being here in the moment right now. Move down into your forehead and face. Let go and release the tension and relax your forehead, face, your ears, your nose, your jaw. Just notice what that feels like to release the tension and feel soft throughout your face. Let's move into your neck and shoulders. Allow them to relax and let go of any tension. Moving down through your upper back and your chest, your abdomen, and your lower back. Focus on keeping all of these areas relaxed and just being here, just sitting, just breathing. Let's move into your waist now, your thighs, your knees, your lower legs, and now into your feet, which are firmly planted on the floor. Allow yourself to visualize yourself in your classroom or office. You're all alone, sitting, your lights are off. Think about that thing that you're grateful for and just focus on it. Repeat it in your mind. If other thoughts try to sneak in, just gently put them on a cloud and let them drift away, bringing your focus back to what you're grateful for. Continue to breathe, focusing on the spaces between the breaths and what you're grateful for. Notice how it makes your body feel and focus on that feeling for a minute. Shifting your mind, let's start to notice your feet making contact on the floor, the weight of your body on the chair, and beginning to open your eyes again. Allow yourself to slowly transition back into your day, into the room. And after you hear the sound of the bell, you'll be back in the group. What was that like? I remember in my old job, they offered yoga for a while. You know, like all hospitals and health systems are focused on wellness, which is a good thing. But I went to yoga a few times and realized that it's really hard to relax at work. Work is not a place of relaxation. It's a place to be alert, learning, focused, on guard maybe a little bit. So it was really hard for me, I remember, to do yoga at work, and I kind of quit that and tried to do it on my own time. But so, with that in mind, I don't expect complete relaxation here. You are working, but nevertheless, what was that like for you guys? Anyone want to volunteer? Everyone is still in a trance. No, they were laughing. Thank you.
So, I have a degree in psych, education. So, my previous jobs, I did a lot of mindfulness and a lot of meditation techniques. This is honestly one of the best ones that I've ever experienced.
Ooh.
So,
Wow.
I felt very at ease.
Can we get that in writing?
A testimonial. Well, thank you for sharing. That's awesome to hear that. Anyone else? I will be honest, sometimes when I do this with the kids I work with, I will get responses like, I remembered all the things I was worried about, or I could feel all my pain, and I'm like, oh, that's not what I wanted. But at the same time, it actually is what we want, because before we could work on our problems, we have to notice them and be aware of them. So sometimes meditation has aspects of, confronting some things that are challenging. So it's not necessarily a problem, it just is. Did anyone have that experience where they started to think about things they didn't really want to be thinking about?
That happens to me all the time, but I'm kind of ADD. So I like putting it on a cloud and making it go.
Right. A little imagery. Thank you.
A piece of that is when you have those thoughts, you don't judge them. They're just there. And so you can gracefully and non-judgmentally look at them and just let them float away.
I think the official definition of mindfulness this is a paraphrase, but being present in the moment without judgment, with self-compassion and compassion for others. So that's an important piece. Any other experiences that you want to share? We can move on. Okay. So then I'll sort of quickly share that for the classroom, that what we just experienced may be a little too involved or too lengthy for your classes, but you could take a piece of it, and I'll do a brief sample for that. I'll even ring the bell here. Or no, I need you to ring the bell because it only rings if it's in the air or on that thing. So this is something you might do with your kids. Take a moment before class starts. You'll turn off the lights, and you'll have your kids sit in the chair, and you could just say this to them. Notice your body. Notice your feelings. Notice your thoughts. Decide to have a positive day. And think about what you're grateful for. Okay, so really simple, and if it becomes a habit or a routine for them, it sort of becomes like a bookend for the day and a sense of security and safety and centeredness. It's as much a meditation as it is a cue for the kids.
So we're going to shift gears now a little bit to a different type of exercise. And if anyone has negative emotions about this, which is understandable, it's okay if you need to leave or take a moment. So we're going to do another visualization. I'm not going to ring the chime on this one. So how many of you have been on an airplane? Wonderful. So think about the last time you were on an airplane, right? You look out the window, there's beautiful scenery. I remember one time when I was on an airplane, the pilot sort of turned the airplane. He's like, oh, you look out the right side of the plane and there's the Grand Canyon. And it was pretty cool to see the Grand Canyon from like 30,000 feet. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of a different story. So you're on a flight home with your family after having a nice vacation. The pilot announces that due to a strong thunderstorm, in an attempt to avoid landing in the storm, the plane will circle the airport. While the plane is circling, you can see lightning off in the distance, and a few minutes go by, and the pilot states that most of the storm has passed and the plane is cleared for landing. As the plane begins its descent, you notice the plane is moving into some clouds and you begin to hear thunder. The plane starts to shake from turbulence, and you notice what you consider to be significant lightning that seems to be very close to the plane. The plane then experiences some severe turbulence in which an overhead compartment opens and a small suitcase falls out onto a passenger's head. The plane drops suddenly, making the overhead oxygen mask drop. But thankfully, the pilot is able to quickly recover and finally land the plane. And upon landing, you notice several people applying ice on their heads, and the woman who was hit by the falling luggage is getting a bandage on her nose that appears to be swollen and bloody. So my question for you is, hearing that scenario, about a year later, after your experience, it's the day before you're going on another plane for another vacation with your family. Think about these two questions for a moment. How are you feeling? And what are your thoughts? Take about 30 seconds to think about that. How are you feeling? What are your thoughts about to get on to another airplane? Since we have a room full of teachers, you guys know what a think, pair, share is, right? So what we're going to do is, now you're thinking about it, and so turn to the person next to you and share what you're thinking. How are you feeling? What are your thoughts about to get back onto this airplane? We'll take about a minute or two to do that, and then we'll come back and take some volunteers.
Sometimes it's present.
We're going to take about 30 more seconds to share your thoughts with the neighbor. Okay, so we're going to share what your thoughts were. How are you feeling about to get back on that plane? Anyone would like to share?
Come on, guys, I feel like too late talk. No, you're the students.
Thank you.
I am a great flyer, but like the last year I was flying alone and something like, not this bad, but something like this happened to me. And I got tense and I think I just grabbed the person next to me. And she actually was a flight attendant who was like incognito. And she said, honey, don't worry, this happens all the time, nothing's gonna go wrong. Like even though I knew it wasn't gonna go wrong, she made me feel better. So I think that kind of helped me to not be stressed for the next time. It was such a big accident.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So you had a great experience within the bad experience.
Right.
So coming back onto an airplane later, how do you feel about that?
Fine, I fly all the time, it's always good, but that was the one time that
Okay.
I would have been worried, but she kind of solved the problem
Okay.
right there.
Anyone else feel fine? No big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Why was that? Why did you feel fine? No big deal.
But I'm in a place that I'm not really worried. I'm in a place where things like that do not happen. But I will be more worried about my kids and how they feel about that.
Okay.
That would be my top concern.
Very good. Who felt differently? Yes, thank you.
I've been on a lot of flights too, but if I were getting on a plane after an incident like that was so intense, I would feel anxious. I would feel anxious during takeoff. But I'd get on the plane. I wouldn't change my travel.
Okay. So how many of you would feel sort of maybe a low sense of anxiety getting on the plane? Okay. Anyone else have a different feeling?
I would check training bears.
Okay, no, that's a good point. That is an excellent point. And we're going to talk about fight or flight later on. No pun intended, yes.
So, just in response to what the first person said, I remember this very clearly because when 9/11 happened, I was just starting graduate school and I was living in Manhattan, just actually a few miles, which there was very far from ground zero. You know, people were coming to my neighborhood for safety, but to the outside world, I was really just a mere 3 miles away. But the reason why I bring that up is we had a lot of conversations about trauma, of course, at that point, and we read a lot of articles and had a lot of discussion groups. And one of the, if you could remember like one pearl of wisdom from each class or each semester or whatever, to me that was a success. And the pearl that really stuck out for me at that point was the idea that one of the most significant and impactful protective factors after experiencing something that could be traumatic to determine whether or not a person would have a trauma reaction versus kind of cope pretty well with it and be able to move on was the idea of what support you had surrounding that trauma. So when you had said that, that incognito flight attendant grabbed your arm and she just immediately gave you this sense of security and support, and that really just like shifted the trajectory, that brought me right back to that pearl of wisdom. And I think it's really relevant because we could be that community of incognito flight attendants for our students. We could be that base of support. We can't do everything, of course, because their families and other important systems have big impacts too, but we could definitely provide something like that to our students as they may be experiencing things.
So how many of you had maybe experiences a little more, maybe your anxiety was a little stronger than we've talked about? I know that would have been me. Who raised their hand over here? Yes. What were you feeling? What were your thoughts? Okay. How did that feel in your body?
I kept usually go back to 9/11.
Yeah?
The fears that I had then.
Yeah,
I don't like that.
absolutely. And that's, that for me, the reaction that I had when I was even, when we were putting this together was a similar reaction to that. And I actually did go back to the 9/11 and, watching it live on TV and what that looked like and how I felt and everything like that. And I do get that reaction when I go on airplanes. Exactly. So everyone has a different reaction. So some people can process through it. Oh, it's going to be fine. Airplanes are the safest mode of transportation, safer than cars, that whole thing. Some folks have different levels of anxiety. Some folks would just avoid it. I've talked to some folks after 9/11 who won't even go on an airplane. They're just trained in trains or cars or whatever. And then there's the fight, flight, or freeze stage too, which some of you sort of touched upon that a little bit, right? So some of you are tensing up that you're having those internal reactions. So trauma affects everyone differently, okay? So we all experience that same situation, but we're all sensing it and feeling it differently because of our environment and also because of what we've experienced previously. And that is what is happening with our students in the classroom. So many of our students have experienced trauma. And trauma can be a wide range of things. Trauma doesn't have to be some hugely violent event. Trauma can look differently and feel differently to students, and it comes out differently in the classroom. So even the thought of a trauma occurring can cause a reaction, right? So some of us can go back to 9/11, and even that thought of something like that happening again can cause an anxiety reaction in our bodies.
Okay. So I'm going to read a definition of trauma. Ooh, which button do I press? The forward. Okay. Here, and you can read it right along with me. Individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So it's a mouthful, but there's a lot of things that can happen to us that could be experienced as traumatic. And as we just heard, our individual capacities to process different types of adverse events really has an impact on to what extent any given event is traumatic for an individual person. So there's a lot of variation. That being said, there are some things that happen that we know have a likelihood of being traumatic. So of your students, can people call out traumas that they know their students had? I'm curious what the cross-section is of what you've seen. Divorce.
Death of a parent.
Death of a parent.
Desertion.
Desertion, bullying. Anything else? Abuse, of course.
Even for middle school kids, it's a change in group within the school. Those kind of things are very traumatic.
Yep. Particularly if they were feeling rejected, right? What are the surrounding emotions? Those are some really good examples. I think something that happens really commonly, I'm not sure about, I'm new to working in this area, so I don't have a great feel for the different schools and what your sort of makeup is in terms of your student body, but I do know from working at the clinic, I'm seeing a lot of kids who have difficulties with their caregivers, unstable caregivers, whether it be domestic violence or addiction issues with their parents or changing homes. For human beings, all the things that you mentioned have the potential to be traumatic. I think something that's really, beeps, am I doing it? Oh, it's the button, I pressed the button, okay. For children that are in their development, something that is really important to keep in mind is that their sense of security is often a direct reflection or mirroring of their caregivers, of their primary caregivers. So if they have a parent who's not stable for any of those reasons, they experience themselves as being insecure, unsafe, unstable. And those are not the things that we typically think about with trauma. We think about sort of discrete events that could happen, a death, bullying, 9/11, and those things are indeed very traumatic. I think something that's a little more hidden that we want to be attuned to is what that inner family life is like for the kid and what they're, do they go home and have a consistent stable environment. And one of the challenges there is that if they don't, then their trauma is not this thing that happened in the past that now they have to process. It's ongoing. And when we have traumas like that, we develop, the human species is very resilient, and we develop coping mechanisms which keep us safe and help us survive through those traumas. A problem, though, is that those coping mechanisms become so ingrained and so habitual that they start to come out when they're not really needed. And there's so many different examples of that. So Dr. Davies talked about the fight-flight response. You know, we evolved with that fight-flight response for, you know, situations like being faced with a saber-toothed tiger in a wide-open field. But yet, our kids have that response elicited, you know, for a math test. They're having that same reaction. Except the problem is that reaction, they don't, you know, with the saber-toothed tiger, you run it off and you eliminate all those chemicals that occur within the body. But with the math test, they're just sitting there and they're holding it in. And actually, I learned something as we were preparing for this presentation. We had a nurse with us who was going to be with us but then couldn't. And he taught me something that I thought was really interesting, which is that all the chemicals, you know, the cortisol and all that flow through your body when you're in an extreme stress response, they are water soluble. So having a cup of water, there's some scientific backing to having a cup of water, which I thought was interesting. So if nothing else, hand your student a cup of water and you might be able to help them. But in any case, these defense mechanisms are really habitual, and the problem is, while they are adaptive in one scenario at home, you know, say for instance, the problem is that two parents fight really with a lot of hostility and aggression and maybe even, you know, physical violence. So the proper adaptive response is to bolt the situation, right? To hide in a room, go under a bed, go into a closet, something just to get away from that. And that is really adaptive for that kid in that moment. When they're in school and there's a reminder of that feeling that the child gets when they're faced with that fighting at home, they may do the same thing, bolt, except for the fact that the danger is not there in the classroom, and bolting is not going to support them in participating and being a good student and learning and thriving. So it's really important to have that awareness and be attuned to it so that you could be understanding of it, so that your own frustration level stays, you know, intact, so that you could be there for that kid in that moment. Any questions about that? Those concepts? Oh, and I have more to say. Oh, I always forget about this whole thing. Fear, loss of control. Okay. So just so that you know, just a little more sort of education on how trauma may look in your classroom. Well, sleep disruption, so they might seem really tired and have a hard time paying attention because they're not well rested. Their appetites could be disrupted, so they may not eat breakfast because maybe at home it's too stressful, or maybe breakfast isn't served because the routine is a little bit chaotic, and then they're hungry. Irritability, anger, difficulties focusing, worrying, of course, anxiety, and some difficulties with separation from their parents, right? If they're worried about, and again, this is just an example here, but if they're worried about their own selves, or if they're worried about the safety even of their parents, which is so sad to think about, but that really does happen, it's hard to separate and then focus on school. So these are some, I mentioned earlier about coping mechanisms that are adaptive in one scenario, but maladaptive or not too good in another scenario. So of course, obviously, substance abuse and SIB is self-injurious behavior. You know, I don't know if you guys have students or if you're aware of students that do some self-injury. Cutting is usually what people think of, although there's certainly other ways. But that is not an adaptive coping mechanism in any situation, of course, but sometimes that's what kids turn to numb out or or distract from other kinds of pain. Of course, getting into fights and running away. Dissociating is an extreme trauma reaction. Do you guys know what that is? It's when you are faced with something really traumatic and it is so unbearable and overwhelming that the body actually steps out of itself. Not literally, of course, but you separate yourself from your body and you just go somewhere else. And actually, as we were preparing for this presentation, we were talking about a movie that really demonstrated this very, very vividly. Did anyone see the movie Precious? You remember that, how she, I mean, this is really horrible, so, you know, cover your ears if you're sensitive, but she was a victim of rape and incest. And they showed in the movie a scene where she was dissociating and she just went somewhere totally else, somewhere different in her mind while this thing was happening to her body. And it really did preserve her in a sense, except for the fact that then the next day she'd go to school and someone, you know, kind of waving to her in a certain way that reminded her of her perpetrator, she just went somewhere else and she didn't know what was going on right there because she went somewhere else, and that would happen to her repeatedly. And, you know, movies, of course, this is extreme, but it definitely happens. And do you guys know what some common triggers are or reminders for trauma for kids, or for adults for that matter? Do you guys know what a trauma reminder is? It's like anything that kind of brings the person back to the trauma. And the thing is, it's not just, you know, direct conversation about the subject. It could be a smell. It could be a sight. It could be just an emotion. It could be the way someone talks to the student. Really anything could be a trauma reminder, and it's not realistic that you're going to know what everyone's trauma reminders are, but what is hopefully realistic is that you have an idea that this happens, and this is a thing for people with trauma, and it just increases your sensitivity and openness to understanding what's going on with a kid when you're working with them. When a child is in I'm not good at keeping up with the PowerPoint here. So this is a visual of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think most people have probably seen this at some point, but the basic idea is that in order to do higher level things like learning, you need to have your basic needs sort of met, right? Like you don't see a homeless person working on, you know, a calculus problem on the street, not because they're not capable of it necessarily, but because when you're hungry and you're cold and you're not, you know, clean, it's really hard to think about some of those higher level kinds of you know, aspirations. And we could see a similar thing happen with our students who have experienced trauma. It's really hard to think about, you know, writing an essay or, you know, a school presentation or whatever the thing is when you're not really feeling so sure that your mom is safe, or when you're not feeling so sure about your next meal, or when you're just really anxious because of whatever your past experiences are. And this will probably come up later, but I want to make one point really, really clear, is that having trauma or having any type of mental health history is not a reason or an excuse to give a kid a pass. We don't lower our expectations for what the student should do and needs to do because they have a mental health problem or history. What we do want to do, though, is understand what's going on and meet them where they are. The worst thing we could possibly do is give up on them or just kind of say, it's okay, he has a really hard life, so we don't need to worry about math. That's definitely not what we want to do. What we want to do is understand, meet them where they are, and help them grow from there in our environment, which is not easy, of course, and very complicated, but at least it's a general guideline and aspiration.
So something that we can do, one of the things that we want to be able to do with this presentation for you guys is give you some things that you can take with you that you can use in your classroom, such as that guided imagery at the beginning for yourselves and for your students, but also something quickly that you can do in your classroom that can be practiced with yourself and with your students is if you feel yourself getting into a fight or flight, freeze type situation. We have another guided imagery called the 3x3 method. And this is super fast. It can be done in like 30 seconds. And this is something like, this could be something that could be done before a test, maybe. The anxiety's a little high in the room, you're seeing it with your kids, there's some fidgeting happening, some of the kids aren't paying attention, some anxiety about the test happening. So what this looks like is the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just, for a second, practice on our breathing. So when you breathe in through your nose, you're going to breathe in for 5 seconds, and then breathe out through your mouth for 5 seconds. So let's just do that real fast, and then we'll move on to what this means. So breathe in. Breathe out. Focus on the space between the breaths. Breathe in. 3, 4, 5. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So what the 3x3 method is you're going to find 3 things in your room. So we're just going to use this book, this lamp, and this pencil. Okay? Simple stuff. And it's really important not to say like, my favorite red book. That's not what you're going to say in your mind. You're just going to say the book, the lamp, the pencil. Okay? You're not going to be describing it at all other than saying what it is. So when you breathe in the first time, you're just going to be repeating in your mind the book. And you're going to focus on that. The second time you breathe, it's going to be the lamp. And the third time you breathe, it's going to be the pencil. Okay? So let's practice that. You're going to breathe in on the book. The lamp. Pencil. And that is a quick way to help the class and yourself to get focused, to bring down the level of anxiety a little bit, so you can start a task like a test. So Dr. Upberg talked about the fight, flight, or freeze, and the acute stress response. Which was originally intended, as she said, for the saber-toothed tiger scenario. So there's the one guy who's going to fight him, there's the other guy that says, me fight. So, that's what our body was, that's originally where this response came from. And that's why it feels so strong sometimes. You get in these situations and you're like, why am I so revved up? And all I can think about right now is and we're going to talk about this in a minute, there's some situations where you get so revved up so fast that you become not yourself, because you're in this situation. And so that has to do with where it kind of connects to in the brain. So we're going to refer to that as the upstairs, downstairs. And we want to gauge our reactions and the way that we serve our students through that mindset of, are the students thinking with the upstairs brain right now, or are they thinking with the downstairs brain right now? So everybody hold up your hand like this for a second. Give me the sideways thumb. Okay, so that's your downstairs brain, right? That's your brain stem, the limbic system, okay? And so that's the part right here that exists in the fight or flight mode. That's that prehistoric part of your brain, okay? That's a lot of animals have that, but us humans have a special part of the brain, which is the other area. So it's this part here. So when you take your thumb and you put it in, and you put your fingers over top of your thumb, that's what your brain's like, right? You have that upper brain, that upstairs brain, the cerebral cortex part of your brain that's covering the lower brainstem, and that's the part that's going to do executive functioning, that's going to be doing your higher level thinking, that you want to engage, that says, it's not appropriate for me to overreact right now and think about punching somebody in the face, because that's probably not what I need to be doing. I don't want to lose my license and all this stuff. So, although, I've been there, I can tell you that. So, a little bit more information on that. So, yeah, that upstairs part again, right? That upstairs part, the cerebral cortex, is where the decision making, the empathy comes from, the morality. And when we're in fight or flight mode, that gets cut off. That actually cannot function properly, if at all. And so many of our kids aren't, when they have maladaptive coping mechanisms, they're living in a lower brain limbic region area all the time, because that's where they're coming from home. They go home, and they're in their avoidance, they're under their bed, they're in the closet, they're avoiding things, and they come to you, and then all of a sudden you're this warm, hopefully caring, empathetic person, and it's really strange for them, because they don't get that at home. And it causes a lot of anxiety for them, and they go right into fight or flight again, because that's how they cope. And that's what you're seeing in your classroom. And they're actually thinking about you in your classroom with that lower brain functioning, through the lower brain functioning. So in this state, a lot of hormones are released that are water soluble. Your heartbeat goes up, breathing starts to get a little more rapid, a little more shallow sometimes. Maybe your skin gets maybe flushed or pale. Your pupils dilate, right? You want to see that saber-toothed tiger coming at you a little better. You're able to react better. Maybe you tremble. The blood is rushing to all the core organs in the body away from things like the brain. Your digestive system is actually stopping for the moment. So that's why if you're ever in a high anxiety or stress environment, sometimes, there's people who they don't go to the bathroom all day long in that situation because it's actually shut off. And it actually takes almost, it could take up to an hour for the kids to actually shift back to an upstairs brain response. So there's these non-accurate responses, right? And what I mean by that is there are many times when a fight response is not accurate, responding to non-life-threatening events. So how many of you had this concern? So you're in a traffic jam, someone cuts you off, there's an argument, there's work pressure, and you start to feel these things that I had talked about. Maybe your heart rate goes up, you start to sweat, maybe you get really angry, especially when that person cuts you off outside the vocal tunnel or something like that, right? And so you're having a fight or flight response in the moment, but it's not a saber-toothed tiger. It's just some guy who cut you off. It's not a life-threatening event. And these kids are having these responses in the classroom because of their environment. Not your environment, but the environment that they're coming from. So we're just going to take a moment again to do another Rookie Lake moment, and I want you to think about with yourselves for a moment about a time where you had a reaction that might have not been accurate to your environment. Something that triggered you into your fight or flight response. So think about that for about 30 seconds. Turn to your lovely neighbor again, tell them what that is, and then we're going to take a few examples.
Zoe's good at that too. Wow.
Wow. That's why I took work at Starbucks. You know, if people did that to me, that would stress me out. I'd have a fight or at Starbucks. I usually have
Strawberry outside. They took me 16 points.
You can take about 30 more seconds. Okay, so you're thinking about a time where your flight or freeze was kicked in. I was having trouble saying that the other day when we were talking. I was saying flight or freeze 10 times fast. Tripping over that. So, would anybody like to share an experience that they had? Maybe they were quickly activated into the downstairs break. Yes, sir.
My crew was saying I should share my example. It was actually with a student. We were going over a book, and we were just walking through a summary. So I would call on kids and say, okay, and then the character did what? And I literally got to a girl and I said, so what did they do next? And she went, no! Like that loud in class. It was this outsized reaction. And, found out later she just hadn't read, but she was so worried about being embarrassed or so worried that like it would be upsetting that she obviously was in that mode already, and by yelling, she got her desired reaction. I was kind of like, okay, so you'd like to not answer, and we moved on. But there was something happening inside that gave me a no, and I just wanted to know what happened.
Absolutely, and it's great that you recognize that. Because, some folks might have been triggered by that moment. The student starts to scream, what do you start to do yourself, right? You're responding to that.
Well,
you're getting to fight or flight in yourself.
Right, and other kids even afterward were like, oh, she got out of doing stuff. And
right.
I'm like, okay,
exactly.
Not what we're worried about.
Great example, thank you. Anybody else like to share an example? Give me a time that you were in fight or flight. Thank you.
Chris, I'm sorry ahead of time. when we had our end of the year celebration, and Chris said it's been a really good year. No, it hasn't. It was really, really hard for many of us. And it made me angrier than it should have to hear that. And I think maybe we say it's been a rough year, but we made it through. We made it through with each other, and it's a bumpy airplane. Then it was the bumpy airplane ride.
Okay.
But it won't be bumpy next time. So, and I was much angrier than I would have thought I would be.
So what were some of the thoughts that went through your mind?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Did you have any physical response to that? Did you feel?
I was loud. People were sitting next to us, loud and shaking, right? Yeah, I was loud and I was shaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you definitely had that response. And so it's interesting sometimes how even just someone saying something can put you into that mode. Anyone else like to share an example? Yes, please.
Yesterday it was a really busy day, as Ann said, and kids asked, yesterday, a bazillion questions, and then, what can we do this? Can we do that? This is not going to go down. Can I do this? Can I do that? And you just get to the point where you're like, stop. Sit down and relax for a minute, and they don't want to do that. You just get angry because you just can't handle any process everybody's question or needs at the same time.
Absolutely.
You know, so you just get angry. I feel like running away from them all day yesterday.
Okay, so you had the flight
Right.
response to that.
Get
Okay.
away from them questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a good environmental trigger. Yes.
Yes, this is I want to share that.
This is good. This is
Well,
great.
it's funny because I have a little bit of a different take on it because I'm one of the health aides at the school. So anytime I hear over the walkie-talkie, health office, so like it'll be from the gym class. So whether it's Mr. Sharman or Mr. Dietz or Ms. Hawkins, it's like I have a student that's down that hit their head or hurt their ankle, and it's one of those things like I always just kind of like in that moment I freeze. I'm like, and then I hear what's coming in, and like I can feel myself processing. I'm like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is where I need to go. So it's kind of funny because I have, like, I can feel myself going through those different steps whenever I'm processing, you know, the call that comes in.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So, like, sometimes sounds, like we talked about those as triggers, right? So that particular, yeah, so that's a trigger. Like, because you know that you're going to have to be, there's going to be something there on the other end of that for you to do. And that might cause some sort of, stress response because you're maybe not unsure of what that is at the time. You're thinking, unconsciously about all the 4,000 other ones that happened before that, right? What could this be? Maybe there was something in the past that maybe you think it could have been done differently or something that could have been fueling that response possibly, I don't know. So that, that's a wonderful example. And so how do you feel when how do you get yourself, because you said that you were able to, you get kind of tense, but then you start to think about it. How do you get yourself into a calmer space to think about it?
I think a lot of it is for me like knowing it's truly like, okay, I feel that and it's like, okay, I need to go grab my go bag and then just go right down to so that I can go and assess what's going on. Like, okay, when I'm hearing someone hit their head in my immediate thing, I'm like, right, they're conscious, they're bleeding, and then you get there and you actually see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take the steps that I've been trained for.
And that's an important part that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is how do we transition from fight or flight or freeze to a point where we can start to think about it and activate that upstairs brain again. Because you had the initial downstairs brain reaction, but then you're able to switch it over pretty quickly. Anyone else want to share an experience? I was at Giant Eagle the other day, the one up about the park. And, I was stupid enough to go like in the middle of a Saturday. And, there's like a 30-car pileup just trying to get into the parking lot. And I go in there and there's this, I don't know what it is. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but I don't know what it is, but those the vans that pull up from the retirement homes? And these folks were coming out. And, they had their carts and everything, and I tried to go down this one aisle, and I just needed to get my tonic water so I could have a gin and tonic with it. And they're all in the aisle, like, and the carts are this way and that way, and I just can't get to it. And you're like, do you not see me? Are you that in your own world right now that you think you were the only person in Giant Eagle right now? I can already start to feel myself getting right up right now. And so I get mad, and like my thought, I had like this visualizing myself just like plowing my shopping cart through them. And I was like, well, that's probably not a good idea. Probably gonna get arrested, I'll lose my license, go to jail, my kids will not be pleased. I was in county jail for that. But so that was a really irrational response that I had. I mean, it was actually quite a normal response, but if you think about it, it was, it activated my lower my lower downstairs brain there. So, would anyone else like to share an experience? Yeah.
On a field trip on the bus, when you think that the bus drivers should get like a trip into heaven by the time you're done, and they have to repeat it the next day, and even though you're trying to be calm, tell the kids to keep it down because they're screaming in your ears in this metal container, or thinking like you did, you could just plow right through everything. Fight, or like you can't get off, you can't fight.
You're like stuck on the bus. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that would be a great 3x3 moment right there. Earplugs are good too.
Try those.
Okay. Great example. So Dr. Upper's going to share an example, then we're going to transition into our next piece.
So I actually have two stories. With Will's, Dr. Davies' story about being in the Giant Eagle, it had me thinking about, I do a lot of therapy with kids and students, and we work a lot on mindfulness and being able to pause and think about what's happening before responding as opposed to just reacting, right? And I was working with this one girl who has a lot of anxiety and perfectionism, and we were trying to kind of identify that a little bit and think through it, and we were talking about trying to identify what her sort of thinking patterns are that lead her to these perfectionistic tendencies and a lot of anxiety. And I really wasn't sure I was getting anywhere with her. I wasn't really sure if she was kind of buying what I was putting out. But then, 1 or 2 sessions later, she said, I asked her if she had done her homework, because I do assign homework. I try not to call it homework because I don't want to be associated with being a teacher, of course. No, I'm kidding. But I don't want them to feel like they're in school when they're in therapy, because it is different. And so I don't call it homework. But in any case, I gave her something to do in between the session, and she said, I didn't do it, but I found this meme. And she shared the meme with me, and it made me realize that she was hearing what I was saying, but I thought it was so insightful, even though it was so silly and ridiculous. And I'm not going to be able to, quote it precisely and exactly, but this is basically what the meme was. And it really highlighted where mindfulness could come into play. So the meme was, "Lost my pen." That was the title of the meme. And it went like this. It was just a whole bunch of text. Lost my pen equals I can't do my homework. I can't do my homework equals I'm going to fail the class. Fail the class equals I'm not going to get into college. Don't get into college equals won't get a good job. Won't get a good job equals won't have money to take care of myself. Won't take care of myself equals I'll never find a mate. Won't find a mate equals I'll be depressed. Being depressed equals life isn't worth living. Life isn't worth living equals I'm dead. And it's kind of morbid, I know, and it was actually even more elaborate than that, but it was something like that. And so we talked a lot about, wait, hold on, lost a pen. Does that equal no homework, or are there some other options here? Can we borrow a pen? Can we type? Right? So we start to talk about all the different things that could happen right at the beginning of lost my pen, before this whole crazy reaction. And anyway, it was really funny, and it sort of showed me that she did understand what she was doing, because she was doing a lot of that. That meme is a demonstration of catastrophizing, or all or nothing thinking, which are thinking styles that we all do once in a while, but that can get us into a lot of trouble. And they put us in this reactionary mode instead of being responsive to a situation. So mindfulness, whether it's mindfulness as a teacher reacting to what's happening with a student, or whether it's a student reacting to what's happening to them, it's all about pausing, taking in the situation, and thinking and being present, rather than reacting without thinking and landing dead on account of losing a pen, which of course is ridiculous. So I thought that was kind of just a good one to think about. And then the other story that I wanted to tell, and I'm hoping that we might do some sharing, because I'm going to throw myself under the bus here. I'm going to tell you a story about me and sort of an epic fail. But it's okay, because there's always more. Every day is another chance. Every moment is another chance to go a different way. But before I tell the story, what the story sort of is about is this idea of shifting our approach, right? So we want to shift away from when we're faced with a student that is just not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not cooperating. They're not doing their work. They're not listening. Whatever it is, they're making a million requests. We want to shift away from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you. What have you experienced? And that shift, that's a big buzzword right now in the field, in the mental health field, is this idea of like trauma-informed care or trauma-informed classroom management. So that's sort of emblematic of trauma-informed personhood, right? Like what's happened to you, right? Not what's wrong with you. Because everything we do, there's a reason, there's an underlying reason, there's a function to our behavior, and we want to tune into that. And we want to tune into it not only because we'll end up helping be more understanding and we'll end up providing a more sort of nurturing environment to our student, but honestly, we want to do it for ourselves too, because if we're sort of holding on to this particular expectation for the kid and they're not meeting it, it's really frustrating and it kind of makes your blood boil after a while. So here's my epic fail mom story to demonstrate that. And as much as I want to say everything is hunky-dory now, it is a work in progress. But in any case, I had one of my children who's in elementary school was having a lot of academic issues earlier on, kindergarten, first grade. It started pretty early. And I can remember sitting with her doing homework and just getting so frustrated because it's kind of funny looking back at it, but there was this word out, O-U-T. If I tell you that she saw this flashcard 2,003 times over the course of the summer and still couldn't read the word out, it was just so frustrating. And then we would sit and do homework and her nose was running, she was hungry, she had a pee, she just put her head down. I mean, there were so many things that happened during homework time. And I, as the mom, and I'm like, getting so frustrated. And I think because I was worried, like, what's going to be with this kid who can't read the word out after it had been presented to her. I can't even tell you how many times. It probably was 2,003 times. And what was happening was that homework, and this is not unique, by the way, which is why I'm telling this story. I recognize that this is so common, this kind of dynamic, but as a parent and as a teacher too, I was getting so frustrated and she was getting frustrated. We were getting snide with each other and she was running away from me, and it was like, those Chinese finger traps, like that the harder you pull away, the tighter it gets, and it's just not working. And so, eventually we started to do some testing and figure out, like, okay, there's really a problem here with her learning, and her behaviors were very protected. It was so hard for her, so frustrating, and we found out that she had some very significant vision issues also that were contributing to this reading problem. And once I started to tune into the great difficulty that she was really legitimately having and why she was trying to escape this homework situation, because it was just really painful for her and frustrating, and it was affecting her self-esteem. She's a bright kid despite these learning issues. She was recognizing that she was really not doing what she was supposed to be doing. But once I could start to tune into that and let go of my fears about what is going to be with this kid and my frustrations about why is she behaving this way, and start to really meet her where she was, things really started to turn around. And going back to what I was saying earlier, when a kid is having a problem, whether it's trauma, whether it's mental health, whether it's a learning issue, it's not that we're now saying, oh, she has a learning disability, it's all good, I don't have to push this agenda. That's not it at all. We're not giving up on these kids, we're meeting them where they are. So, we start to figure out what was happening from a learning standpoint cognitively. We start to get into some therapies. In this case, in my personal story, we switched to a different school that had, more resources for her. And so again, it's not giving up. It's not saying, okay, we get a pass. I could take the pressure off myself for trying. I could take the pressure off of the kid for performing. We're just coming at it from a different perspective so that we could feel good about what's happening, so that they could feel good about what's happening, and ultimately things move in a better direction. Maybe not in the traditional trajectory that our original expectations would have led us through, but through the trajectory that's going to be most optimal for that kid. And you're going to feel so much better when you see that happening. And I think too, something that has not yet been said today, but I probably should have said this in the way beginning, which is that don't do it alone. This is not your job to figure everything out. Your job is to be with the kid, to teach the kid, to notice when something doesn't seem to be going the way it should. But do not, please, do not try to solve this on your own. Use your resources, your school counselors, call meetings with the parents, communicate, get the principal involved, get the school psychologist involved. If you have specialists, some schools, I don't know what you guys have here, have school-based mental health services. Do not do this alone. I completely forgot the second part of this segment, which was that now that I did kind of throw myself under the bus. I didn't tell you my worst war story, by the way, because I want to keep up the image that, I'm doing these things well and everything, but I did share something, and I was wondering if anyone could share a story or a situation that they experienced where either they kind of maybe realized in retrospect that they really weren't tuned in to the moment and to the needs, or by all means a time where you really did pick up on one of these challenges and kind of met the kid where they were, and just what that experience was like. Please.
I'll just be loud.
Yeah.
Well, my son has anxiety issues, and I know that, of course, because he's my son. But instead of remembering that, and he doesn't care to get on elevators, I, manhandled him and forced him to get on an elevator just because that's what I wanted him to do. So we were in a parking garage, and so he took off into the parking lot of the parking garage where I had to chase him down, which was super unsafe. So it ended up like I was crying, he was crying, his twin sister was crying, and so it ended up being this like horrible moment of anxiety and stress and Mom of the Year award, where we could have just taken the steps, which would have been healthier, and it wouldn't have done any harm to walk 4 flights of stairs to where we were going. But I just wanted to get on the elevator and be done with it, and I was being stubborn and unthoughtful, and I just didn't think of it in that moment, and so it just happened.
Yeah.
And so now I just have to really remember to consider the needs. I just have to always remember what are everybody else's needs before mine, wherever we go. And so when he says I don't want to ride the elevator like real smart and almost aggressively, it's not really that he's being that way towards me. It's his anxiety speaking. It's not that he's speaking to me that way to be, a jerk. So he's not being a jerk towards me. And I think as a teacher that helps me, because sometimes when kids speak to me as a jerk, like I don't want to do this because I have to remember that maybe they're not speaking to me that way because they're being a jerk, but because they don't want to do it because they're anxious about something, and I have to get to the heart of why. So his anxiety has helped me not only be a better mom to him, and to my other child actually, but also to my students that have, anxiety and maybe depression, that I'm not really hearing who they are speaking to or from, their anxiety or really from their heart. And a lot of times it's from their anxiety.
Thank you. Yep, that was a great example. Anyone else? Any brave souls?
So
this sounds like something my parent generation would say, but when do we say that we overdiagnose and they're being a jerk? They really are being a jerk.
Right. That's a great question.
Because sometimes they're just being jerks.
Right. And that is a fantastic question. And right, so where is the line between a child who's just not behaving well because they want what they want versus an underlying anxiety disorder? And I think that we could probably do an entire, 2 hours on that subject alone. But one maybe guiding principle that I will sort of mention here, and I'd be curious if other teachers have this experience where they're not sure if the behavior truly is a function of something deep-rooted like anxiety or trauma versus like the kid's just not trained well, which could exist too, right? So the good news is that the solution is not entirely different no matter if it's anxiety or just bad behavior, because even in the case of anxiety, we're not saying, okay, you never need to ride the elevator ever again. We're saying we need to think about what's happening and approach this in a sensitive, systematic manner, right? So we don't just throw the kid on the elevator against their will necessarily, but that doesn't mean that we don't make a plan to practice ways of gradually getting comfortable on an elevator, right? So this goes back to, I think, a point I was trying to make earlier, which is that by understanding, we're not dismissing expectations. We're just lowering our own frustration level, and we're setting expectations in a way that is sensitive to the individual needs. Now, to your question of how do you know the difference, that's where you gotta talk to the parents, get input from another professional if you're not too sure, right? Because there are ways to assess that. Anxiety is not just a kid saying, I don't want to do this. There are very specific experiences and symptoms that coincide with anxiety as a disorder. Any other thoughts on that? I know from my experience that working with kids in the office, this definitely comes up in the classroom, where it's not clear if a child is requesting a certain accommodation based on a legitimate health problem versus, well, I just don't really like taking tests. It's not comfortable. Well, it's not supposed to be comfortable necessarily. But what's the difference between not being able to face a challenge versus having, a condition?
Can you talk just a few sentences worth about what it looks like combining all these things with oppositional defiance?
Well, that's a really good.
Can you nutshell it for us?
Yeah. So with oppositional defiant disorder, you might on the surface see similar behaviors, like this brave teacher who shared about her twins. That child was being kind of oppositional, but underneath it there was anxiety. So in terms of how it may look the same on the surface, but again, it comes back to what else is happening with the kid. Are they having panic attacks? Are they not participating in activities that they want to participate in because they're too anxious about the social component? Do they want to have good grades? They demonstrate motivation in general, but when it comes to presentations in front of groups, they totally refuse to do it. So you really have to look at the bigger picture, because absolutely anxiety on the surface could manifest in oppositional behavior. But what else is going on? Is the oppositional behavior occurring only in certain situations versus is it occurring across the board whenever a demand is made? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's complicated, and that's probably why you have the question, because it's not easy to always decipher those differences. So you really need to have a thorough sort of investigation or evaluation on how the child is presenting across settings too, and situations. Any other brave souls? Can anyone share a moment or a time where they felt like really tuned into the kids' needs and they felt themselves being more patient and calm as a result of that tuning in? I'm sure you guys have many examples, maybe too many to choose from. Okay.
I would just share that I think that's one of the things that's sometimes hard to analyze, because in middle school, the core classes, we get to teach on a team. So 5 of us will have the same kid, and it's funny, you'll talk about certain kids, and 2 teachers are like, she doesn't bother me at all, and 3 teachers are like, oh my word, she gets on my last nerve, you know?
Yeah.
And it switches around. It's not like, oh, the 3 teachers who always feel this way, or the 2 teachers who always feel this way. I think that's sometimes where we got to look at ourselves too. Why does a kid who 2 other people are saying, oh no, she's fantastic, why am I sitting there going, wow, she frustrates the living heck out of me, you know?
Yeah, what are your, right, it's like a reminder for, right, the kids have reminders, but so do we. Who's this child reminding us of? And what feelings is it bringing up for us? That's a great point.
So I know we've even had, just personally have had instances where like a kid or some other adult, even like looks like somebody who we know that we might have not had a good experience with, so that already taints that ability for us, to function professionally with that person at that time. So another quick thing. This also doesn't mean that we don't respond to safety issues. It's not about like, oh, this kid's had a traumatic experience and we're gonna, let him throw the desk through the window in the classroom kind of a thing, or harm himself. So that's not what we're saying here. So we're still gonna respond to safety concerns as part of this approach. So the one thing really today that we keep going back to is acknowledging that many of the students have lived through or are currently living through experiences that are bringing a great deal of stress to their lives. And many have learned maladaptive coping skills to survive. And coming into your classroom context with that mindset is going to help greatly. Some things, and you probably know a lot of this stuff already, but just very briefly, some things you can do in your classroom that would be considered a trauma-informed practice is that, continuing to reinforce through your behavior and through verbally saying that you are a safe person and this classroom is a safe space, and continuing to help the students understand that. Opportunities for choices and ownership. So a lot of the times our initial reaction, particularly with kids who maybe are a little oppositional, defiant, is to take things away. And sometimes they're so used to getting things taken away that if we give them a responsibility, they're kind of like shocked. When I taught at the inpatient school at Western Psych, and we had some pretty significant cases of some kids with some unfortunate behaviors there who were so used to getting things taken away. They were taken out of their house. All their belongings were taken away. They come to the hospital, they get their shoes taken away. They're in the classroom with socks on, right? Because we're afraid that they're going to hang themselves with their shoelaces. And so giving them a little bit of a responsibility. Like today, you're gonna be my classroom rule reader. It goes a long way, and I've had that shock reaction from them. They're like, really? Like nobody ever really gives me anything, and you can use that to build from. Making sure in your classroom is a quiet and a safe, but also that there is a space in the classroom that's quiet and safe. I know some of the elementary schools. I'm not sure about the middle. They have sort of like mindfulness corners, or a space where they can go and if the kids need a minute, there's an activity there that's been practiced that they can engage in. Sensory and those activities are pleasant with images and colors. Using opportunities for movement. And, it's hard to sit here for 2 hours, let alone middle school kids sitting down for a long period of time. So incorporating some movement into your lessons, trying to be very specific with your positive reinforcement, and really preferencing positive reinforcement over negative reinforcement. And incorporating moments for relaxation, music and breathing, maybe the 3x3 moment, some other guided imagery.
So this is just a little kind of visual infographic to give you a sense of what trauma-informed care might look like and how it differs from non-trauma-informed care. I do want to actually loop before we go through this, I think it's somewhat connected, but more so connected to a question we had back there about, the difference between ODD and anxiety. Has anyone read The Explosive Child by, I think Ross Greene is his name? It's one of these books that I know a lot of schools are assigning their teachers to read. But in any case, he has this idea or this concept that he puts forth in the book. It's a really good book, by the way. But the idea that behavior, we teach math, we teach language and writing, we teach art, we teach drama, we teach karate, right? We teach all these things, but there's sort of this implicit expectation that behavior is something that we just expect and that kids know how to do. But the reality is, at least in some cases, behavior is a skill too. It does come more naturally to some kids more than others, of course, but behavior is a skill also. And whether it be that just for whatever reason, the innate genetic makeup of a child lends them to just have trouble figuring out the best ways to behave and handle stressful situations, or because the environment that they exist in at home or elsewhere didn't do the best job teaching those skills, how to follow directions, how to listen, when to, hear that firm voice and know it's time to really be quiet or to listen or whatever the case is. Behavior is a skill. And sometimes we need to look at it as a skills deficit rather than a kid kind of behaving badly because they just want what they want. And that I find that to be really challenging, because when a kid looks you in the face in that defiant manner and just does what they want to do and not what you ask, I think it's really hard. I think it really goes against the grain of what's natural for us to take that perspective of, okay, this kid lacks the skill to react to the situation appropriately, and let's figure out where that skills deficit is and help them build those skills. It's hard to do that, but that's just, I think that's an interesting idea for us to ponder. So moving into this, which is related, I think, to a similar idea. So a behavior happens, and so that behavior could be the student disrupts the class every time we read out loud. So a non-trauma informed response might be to think he's bad, he's doing it on purpose, he's unwilling to follow the rules. A more trauma-informed, oh, this is totally normal, right? As I just said, it's very hard to think in other ways, I think. A trauma-informed response would be, okay, something happened, there's an experience informing this behavior, downstairs brain is in control. And looping back to the story I was telling about my own daughter earlier, is that she was having a lot of behavioral issues at school, and I was thinking, oh God, here we go. I do this at work, I don't want to deal with this at home, but okay, I guess kids are kids. And I remember we did do this assessment process, and the teacher that she had when she was really struggling, but yet we weren't at the point of really understanding what was happening, talked about her being anxious and avoidant and oppositional and all these things, and she gave all sorts of examples that embarrassed me when I heard that my daughter was doing these things in school. And of course it's most of the time not always this simple and easy, but I'm being 100% truthful when I tell you that when we figured out what was happening and we switched the learning environment, she's in a different school now, her teachers would never say these things. It's like the total opposite. And which is such a relief to me, of course, that, I'm not dealing with those problems now. But it was such a clear picture of kids behave badly for reasons, whether it's a lack of skill in behavior or whether it be a protective response. She was embarrassed when she was called on. This example is actually, I didn't make this example up, Will did, but it's totally true to that story. When she was asked to read out loud, she would start tipping her chair. It's the most obvious kind of thing. You'd think, how did you not pick up on this sooner? But, it's harder in real life to pick up on it compared to when you're just telling the story. So, the trauma-informed concept is to think about what's underneath these behaviors.
Okay, so we're going to shift a little bit to a discussion that tends not to happen sometimes. So we really focus on the kid and their behaviors and their experience, but what about your experience? Maybe you're coming into work and you're dealing with a lot of stress at home. You're serving your kids' needs. Maybe you had a death in the family. Maybe one of your parents is elderly and you have to take them to a lot of appointments, or you're having difficulties with a spouse or something like that. And so you're bringing in a lot of your own stuff into the classroom. And then, how many kids do you typically have in the classroom? What would you say? 45? 25? Yeah. Okay. So you have like 20, 30, something like that, kids. And so all of a sudden, you're bringing in your stuff. And now you're starting to hear all the stuff from 30 other individuals that you're taking on yourself, again, on top of your own things. And you only have so much space, right? There's only so much room in your mind and in your heart for these kind of things, particularly when you're dealing with your own kind of concerns. And so being exposed over time to these kids and their trauma and their experience causes secondary trauma. And the research talks about that a lot of teachers are experiencing this, and this is leading to burnout. And so there's a huge impact on human service professionals, and it actually mirrors direct trauma. So there's sometimes feelings of hopelessness and anxiety. And traumatized employees, traumatized teachers can't be as effective, right? You're functioning sometimes in that downstairs brain mode with your class, and it's just not as effective teaching. And so sometimes there's things like hypervigilance happening, hopelessness. There's an inability to embrace complexity. Maybe something goes off just a little bit differently than you thought, and you feel yourself getting really upset about that. Maybe your listening skills aren't as good. You don't want to hear about it, and all you can think about is what your thoughts are. Maybe sometimes you're avoiding some of these behaviors. Like, I can't deal with this right now. I'm just going to ignore this because it's just too much for me. Maybe maybe there's some anger, some cynicism, sleep disturbance at home. That could be sleeping too much, not sleeping enough, waking up in the middle of the night. Having your professional experience work its way in through your subconscious into your dreams, coming out that way. Some fear, and also chronic exhaustion. Like, I just slept 12 hours. Why am I so tired? Maybe because you're burned out. Maybe it's because you're taking on so many of the experiences of these kids along with yours, and that's having an effect on you and your body over time. And that also leads to physical conditions as well. So we start to feel these things, and it's through compassion fatigue, and it comes out in burnout, because you guys care for these kids, right? That's why, raise your hand if you got into this field because you care about kids. Make sure that everybody cares about kids. Okay, that's why you're here. You care. You actually care, because we know that we're not going to be millionaires doing this at the end of the day. So you're here for a deeper purpose, that deeper connection, and it's very personal to you. You want to be a great teacher and affect these kids. You want to be that teacher 53 years from now that a student is still talking about, that had that huge impact on their lives. Maybe you had a teacher like that. And so through this process, though, you're starting to feel, the 3 stages of burnout. You're starting to feel emotionally exhausted. You're starting to depersonalize things. Like, you're sort of giving all the students the same treatment across the board, right? Maybe you're being kind of short or whatever with all the students. And then you're starting to question your own professional self-advocacy. Am I really doing a good job? Is this what I want to be doing for a living? Maybe I should, do something else. I remember one time when I was working at inpatient, we had a situation where they would actually on occasion have riots on the unit. And so there was a riot on the west wing of the inpatient unit, and one of the nurses had his head bashed into the floor repeatedly, and he lost his ability for short-term memory for quite a while. And so that was very traumatic for the staff, myself who were there. How many of you remember the shooting that was at Western Site a few years ago? So and not to harp on this too much, but I thankfully was actually off that day. But as being the principal of that school, I get a call from the teachers on speakerphone telling me that there's a gunman in the building. They have all the kids in the classroom locked in, and they're not allowed to let the kids out. So the kids have to go to the bathroom. What are they supposed to do? Right? They can't go out in the hallway because there's a gunman. And I could hear the shots in the phone because they're on the 3rd floor. The gunman was on the 1st and the 2nd floor. And so the kids they were hiding under their desks. They were, going to the bathroom with trash cans. That was the only thing we could think of. And, these types of experiences. And we had a teacher the next morning who we decided to walk in as a group the next morning after this happened. And we get a call, one of the teachers is missing. And we didn't know where she was, and she called us and she said that she was lost on the way to work. So she had a dissociative moment, and we were trying to figure out where she was. And she ended up, instead of being in Oakland, she ended up, there's somebody up there doing something. She ended up, no one else hears that? Just okay, thank you. Book, Pennsylvania. Okay. So she ended up, instead of being in Oakland, she ended up being in Beaver County, little cornfields. Right? And so we had to call the police to go out there and get her and everything like that. But through that experience, a group of us became extremely burned out from that experience. We were experiencing these type of symptoms. And I remember, one time, it was like really weird, since we're kind of divulging things here. I was at Walmart, and then, the greeters, they give me the cards, and I'm like, that looks like a roller skates. Maybe I could do that. I mean, that didn't make any sense, but but to me at that time, in my current state, because of that burnout, that's what it was. Thankfully I was able to work my way out of it. But that's the kind of stuff, that's that's an extreme example of the environment that you're in and what you have to, what you're experiencing and how that manifests itself in you as a teacher. Let me just put that. So part of that is building up your level of resiliency. And so everybody's like these bases, right? Everybody's a different size, a different shape, and you have a different space. So if you're bringing stuff in with you from home, maybe the base is a little filled up at the bottom already. You're coming to you're dealing with all these personal concerns. You've had 15 years of experience where you've been absorbing traumatic experiences from a lot of these students, and your base is like right at the top, and all it's going to take is that one little reaction, and the water is going to start overflowing. Right? So we want to talk about ways as teachers that you can give yourself a little more space in there to get through the day and continue to attach to that original passion why you absorbed all those student loans to go to school to go become a teacher, which was because you care about the kids and you want to be a good teacher, right? A good education, make it. So we want to be able to find a way to get into that well of resiliency and to create more space. So part of that is shifting your mindset from, something is wrong, we have a problem in the classroom, it's happening I
was thinking more like UFO.
It's tapping into our resourcefulness and what can we do to start all of these things. So that's self-care. Are you exercising enough? Are you sleeping enough? Are you getting like at least 7 hours? How many of you at least getting 7 hours? Or maybe you can't. I have a 4-year-old too. And he decided to wake up last night, so I think I had about 5.5 hours. He wanted to go downstairs to the kitchen and eat breakfast before. That ain't happening. But it woke us up. Are you attending to your social relationships? Is what you're feeling as a professional having an impact? Like, you know what, I'm so full right now, my base is so full that I can't even deal with my friends right now, and is that those kind of things, are they starting to slip away from me? pulling those friends back, your social relationships? Are you attending to yourself professionally? Are you going to seminars and re-engaging yourself professionally?
Has anyone ever seen this? Does anyone know about wise mind? Is that familiar? This diagram comes from Marsha Linehan, who developed a therapy, an evidence-based therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And what she did was she actually took things that already existed in the canon of psychological interventions, and she kind of repackaged it in a really user-friendly, systematic way. And this is something that she developed, so it's part of the mindfulness module of her treatment. And of course, she didn't invent mindfulness meditation. That came from Eastern cultures. But in any case, so the wise mind is an adaptation of the mindfulness idea. And what it basically explains is that we all are capable of 3 states of mind. We've got the emotion mind, the reasonable mind, and the wise mind. And emotion mind is when we're all driven by emotion, we're pure emotion. We don't really think through our responses, we just react emotionally. Reasoning mind is when we're just really logical, right? We're just going through a sequence, we're not really thinking about feelings or relationships or past experiences, we're really just being very sequential and logical. And in the interest of time, we won't go too deep into it, but basically it's important to know that there are circumstances where being an emotion mind purely is very appropriate to the situation and there's no problem. And similarly, there's times in our lives where we want to be really logical and reasonable, and that's a very healthy response too. But most of the time in our lives, we really want to be in our wise mind, which is when we combine our reasoning mind and our emotional mind, right? So we're teaching a class and we're tied to our lesson plan, but we're also able to be intuitive and tuned into what the needs of our student may be, and we respond by integrating both of those parts of our mind. So it's just sort of a tool that you could use for yourself and teach your kids, and you could use that language. So when things are happening in the classroom, you could pause, right? Acknowledge what's happening and recruit your reasoning mind and your emotional mind in order to respond mindfully or with your wise mind. Okay, so we are going to conclude with one more meditation, and it's called eating.
Please don't eat yet, even though you want to. I know you do. I wanted to bust this bag open on the way in this morning, but I didn't do it. Just one each, and just hold that Hershey Kiss in your hand.
It is.
Okay, does everyone have one?
Anybody else need it?
So we're going to focus in right now on our breathing again. Making sure that our feet are firmly planted on the floor. And when we ring the chime, please take a minute and focus on that Hershey Kiss in your hand. If I tell you I brought you something, what happens? What do you notice in your mind and body? And if I say I brought you something to eat, what happens? What do you notice in your mind and body? What if I had told you I brought you some chocolate? Just notice how your mind and body start to respond to those words as I share this food with you. Please don't eat it yet. Just hold it in your hands. What is it like in your mind and body as you wait? Now, I'd like you to just look at this food with fresh eyes, mindful eyes, as if you've never seen anything like this before, even though you have. And if doing this feels strange or silly, just notice that and set aside those thoughts and put them on the cloud and let them drift away for a moment. Now take a moment to consider the journey this food took to arrive in your hands. Think about how it came from my hands, my car, the store, the people that brought it from the farm or factory to the store, all the way to your hand and soon to your mouth. And consider everything it took to make this. The sunlight to grow the ingredients, the rainwater, the things that made up all of the packaging. All of these are part of this too. All the people and the places and elements are part of this being here in your hands. Perhaps you can imagine these people and places in this food as we start to explore this with your senses. First, explore the visual sense, carefully turning this food around in your hand and examining it in the light. Close your eyes and feel it, noticing texture and temperature against the skin of your hands and fingers, feeling its weight as it rests in your palm. Keeping your eyes closed, raise it to one ear and then to the other. Yes, listen to it, especially as you move it in your fingers next to your ear. Now bring it under your nose. First, just breathe in through your nose. Notice all that happens as you breathe in, how your body responds, your mouth and stomach, and how also your mind responds with thoughts and feelings, and maybe even memories. Now bring the food away from your nose. Begin to unwrap and unpeel the food. As you do, listen to all the sounds of the unwrapping. And notice what happens with your other senses as well. Notice again the smells as the emotions come to you. Lift the food to your lips and hold it there, but don't take a bite just yet. Notice the sensations in your mouth and body. Also observe the thoughts, feelings, and urges in your mind and your body. What is your stomach telling you? What is your mouth asking you right now? Now take the smallest bite that you can. Watch what the mind does and what the body does. Your stomach, your saliva, your thoughts and feelings, your memories, your associations. Wait a moment for these sensations to fade. Then close your eyes and place the food on your tongue without moving it. For now, just let it rest, feeling the weight, temperature, and shape of it on your tongue, and notice the taste as well. When you've observed the physical sensations, notice also your thoughts, feelings, and urges. Slowly allow your tongue to move in exploring the changing textures and the flavors from bitter to sweet. Listen to the sounds. If you're having other thoughts, or if there's other sounds that are distracting, place them on a cloud and let them drift away. Be aware of any images or movies that float through your head, perhaps the journey this food took, perhaps other times you've eaten something like this. Become aware of your body's automatic responses. Your stomach is getting ready. Notice your thoughts and the memories. Now bite or chew the food and notice how it changes again. You can continue to explore, even tuning in to each sense one at a time, feeling texture without the taste, or noticing just sound. And then when you're ready, swallow what's left. Keeping your eyes closed, scan through your body, noticing what it feels like to be one piece of food bigger than you were a few minutes ago in your body and in your mind. And as we transition back at the sound of the bell, carefully open your eyes and bring yourself back into the room. I'm sorry I had to rush through that a little bit because I know our timing is short. But that is something you can also do while you're eating your lunch or your breakfast or anything like that to help you get into a better wise mind state for your interactions with yourself and your students. It was a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you for being awesome middle school teachers.
Folks, we're going to transition over to the auditorium here in a moment. I'm sure that we can use the restroom real quick. Try to make that just
Yeah.